Hello and welcome to Spectator Out Loud, the podcast where a few of our writers from each week's issue reads out their pieces. This week we're going to be joined by Paulina Neuding, a Swedish writer who reports on the country's latest crime surge. We'll also be joined by Toby Young, who talks about how he was wrong to back Boris. And finally, Lloyd Evans on his theatre review from the magazine this week, and why going to the theatre during the time of coronavirus is just so different. First up, Paulina Neuding.
We have an obvious problem, admitted the Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven recently. He was referring not to the COVID pandemic, but to a summer of crime that has left even jaded Swedes reeling in disbelief. There are regular bombings, hand grenade attacks and shootings. Young men are killing each other at a horrific rate, 10 times that of Germany. The feeling is growing that the government has completely lost control. Yet while Löfven has finally acknowledged the existence of the problem, he still seems in denial about its true nature. Last month in Botkyrka, south of Stockholm, a 12-year-old girl walking her dog was killed by a stray bullet from a gang shooting. And in a TV interview, her friends explained that shootings are simply part of daily life in their neighborhood. One child said that she hears gunfire from her bedroom window almost every night. And this is perhaps what's most shocking for older Swedes, how resigned the children in these areas are, how much they've grown used to the violence. It is all too much for Mats Löfving, the Deputy National Police Chief, who earlier this month decided to speak plainly about the nature of the criminals he and his colleagues are fighting. There are at least 40 family-based criminal networks, or clans, in Sweden, he confirmed. Immigrants who came to the country solely for the purpose of organizing and systematizing crime. According to Löfving, they make their money through drug trafficking and extortion and have a great capacity for violence. The interview was a bombshell. The Prime Minister has always tried to talk about crime as a socioeconomic problem, and he stuck to this line in response to Löfving, saying that I do not want to link crime to ethnicity. A government mantra which insinuates that even asking questions about the link between crime and immigration is xenophobic. But the issue, of course, is not skin color. It's about the problem of an imported type of crime. Families from non-Swedish cultures who stay in their own circles and prey on Swedes of all ethnicities. These are people who have set up parallel systems of government that challenge the Swedish state, something that politicians cannot bring themselves to acknowledge. Conflicts between rival criminals last month escalated to a point where gangs took an unparalleled move to establish their dominance. Masked and armed men set up roadblocks and controlled cars entering certain neighborhoods in Gothenburg. Streets were deserted as the gangs ordered residents to stay inside. The headmaster of a local school put it bluntly. Checkpoints controlled by criminal militia are something I last saw in Afghanistan. I never thought it would become a reality in Sweden. Meanwhile, home visits from doctors have been suspended in the area for safety reasons, and staff from care services for the elderly and disabled are being escorted on their rounds by security guards. The government's solution to problems like these has long been to deny their existence. When people began to talk about no-go zones a few years ago, the phrase caused so much anxiety in official circles that the crime spots were dubbed go-go zones in a PR initiative. For years, the government's position, as well as the narrative reiterated by large parts of the media, has been that the notion of rising crime is some kind of fake news. Based on this idea, the state has set up a PR budget and employed staff to write fact-checking posts to deny international reporting about what's going on. One of the so-called myths busted is that shootings have increased. Only weeks ago, Prime Minister Stefan Löfven famously claimed that even if there were a crime problem, it was nothing to do with immigration. Annie Lööf, leader of Sweden's Centre Party, says that many of these gangs and their families have been in Sweden for decades, as if this would contradict the notion that immigration and failed integration is a root cause of the problem. Prime Minister Löfven has even pointed to upper-class youths in a small suburb of Stockholm as an explanation for gang murders, maintaining that rich kids' consumption of recreational drugs is creating a demand that leads to shootings in poorer areas. Can you really think that drug abuse among a small fraction of the country's youth explains why there are 10 times more gang murders in Sweden than in neighbouring countries? But although it is willing to scapegoat affluent teenagers, the government has so far remained silent about the changing nature of the crime. Some of it so grotesque that it's hard to discuss. At the end of August, 2 teenage boys were abducted, raped, and abused for 10 hours at a cemetery outside Stockholm. When police found them, they had been stabbed and buried alive. Somehow, they survived. These deplorable acts of aggression now have a name in Sweden. So-called humiliation robberies are on the rise, and the victims are often children and young people who are not just mugged, mainly by immigrant youth, but also subjected to all kinds of horrifying and degrading treatment. Because of the threat to children, Swedish parents are beginning to wake up. They're beginning to realize that their children are not growing up in the low-crime country they themselves knew, and they feel that the time to talk honestly about it has long since arrived.
That was Paulina. And now Toby Young.
I admitted I was wrong to back Boris. A friend emailed me earlier this week in despair about the Prime Minister. Quote, "Boris reminds me of a hereditary king, Edward II or Henry VI, who is so staggeringly incompetent that he must be removed before doing too much damage. I felt the same way about May, but Boris is worse." Unquote. He's not the only person feeling like this. It pains me to say it, but I too have given up on Boris. The final straw was hearing him talk about his plans to create an army of COVID marshals last week, Britain's very own curtain-twitching version of the Stasi. What on earth happened to the freedom-loving, twinkly-eyed, Rabelaisian character I voted for? Oliver Hardy has left the stage, replaced by Oliver Cromwell. His government has even said it wants to lower the speed limit on motorways to 60 miles per hour. Didn't Boris once say that voting Tory will cause your wife to have bigger breasts and increase your chances of owning a BMW M3? Where did that guy go? Some people think it's all to do with his bout of coronavirus. As one person put it to me, surviving a near-death experience can affect people in one of 2 ways. Either you become more devil-may-care, thinking it could all end at any moment, so why not live life to the full? Or you become super cautious, having been left feeling vulnerable by your brush with mortality. According to that armchair psychologist, Boris has gone through door number 2. A less generous theory is that the disease actually damaged his brain in some way, and there is some evidence that cognitive decline can lower your appetite for risk. Whether the damage was psychological or physiological, the implication is clear. He's no longer fit to be Prime Minister and should step down as soon as he's got Brexit done. This explanation is attractive to former Boris enthusiasts like me because it lets us off the hook. It's not that we've overestimated him, rather that he's changed in a way we couldn't have anticipated. But the difficulty with those theories is that his mishandling of the crisis predates his battle with COVID-19. Few would dispute that he failed to give the pandemic the attention he should have done in January and February, time he could have spent devising an effective containment strategy. Come March, he was just buffeted by events, one minute saying we should take it on the chin, the next imposing a full lockdown. His lack of engagement with the detail, both before and after his spell in intensive care, means the government's response has been led by others around the cabinet table, like Matt Hancock, who seems to be wholly captured by a small coterie of scientific advisors who decided early on that SARS-CoV-2 was the big one and have been unwilling to abandon that hypothesis in the light of all the evidence to the contrary. Boris's supporters cannot claim they were unaware of this risk. His inability to focus on anything for very long was constantly flagged up by those who'd worked closely with him, most recently at the Foreign Office. My response when this was put to me by his detractors was that he had been preparing for the role of Prime Minister all his life had a heroic conception of himself as a world historical individual and wanted to be installed in the pantheon of immortals as one of Britain's greats. So even if it was only for vainglorious reasons, he would apply himself in number 10 in a way he never had before. Hal would become Henry V, not Henry VI. Unfortunately, Boris's critics have been proved correct. Funnily enough, one of the most prominent, Michael Gove, is now de facto Deputy Prime Minister. 4 years ago, when justifying his decision to knife Boris in the Tory leadership contest, Gove said it was because, having seen him operate up close, he'd concluded he lacked the character for the top job. Not lazy exactly, but not serious enough. At the time, I took this with a pinch of salt, thinking Gove was exaggerating to make it sound as if he was motivated by public spiritedness rather than personal ambition. Now, I think he was right. Hope followed by disappointment is a familiar story in politics, a cycle as old as history itself. I should have been better prepared. In future, I will not be so naive.
That was Toby Young, and now Lloyd Evans.
Arriving for a weekday matinee at the Bridge Theatre, I was greeted by stewards holding illuminated boards. Please wear a face covering. Inside, the seating had been rearranged into clumps of 2s and 3s, with the odd single perch sticking out like a toadstool. Nicholas Heitner, the artistic director, offered us a pair of the best-loved scripts by his favourite living playwright, Alan Bennett. The afternoon was stuffy, and I took sips from a bottle of water in accordance with signage which suggested that masks might be removed for the purposes of drinking. After each glug, I diligently replaced my covering. 10 minutes into the show, I was visited by a COVID marshal, who informed me that the position of my mouthwear dissatisfied him. Can you put your mask over your nose? I keep seeing you taking it off. I did so. He crept back to the shadows to continue spying on me. How bizarre! A stalker hired by the theatre was policing my every move. This level of dictatorial intrusiveness will kill the theatre. An audience can't possibly attend to a drama while the aisles are being patrolled by Stalinist busybodies, licensed to select victims at random and force them to make minute adjustments to their apparel. The theatre is about showing us our better selves. If it turns into a grudge match between art lovers and Philistines, it will die. The performances were excellent, but the atmosphere was muted and uneasy. In the first play, The Shrine, Monica Dolan played a widow whose motorcycling husband has collided with an oak tree. She visits the crash site to kneel and pray, wearing a high-vis jacket to prevent another mishap. But a bothersome safety inspector terminates her devotions. You're an accident waiting to happen, he says. Clearly, Nicholas Heitner hoped this script would amuse us with its topical themes, but our present woes make it 10 times more depressing than Alan Bennett can ever have intended. In the second play, Leslie Manville delivered a heartbreakingly funny performance of Bed Among the Lentils. Even Bennett skeptics will find it hard not to admire this exquisitely crafted portrait of a vicar's wife who rails against her captivity in a dead-end parish. Sadly, the audience in the half-empty house responded with far less merriment than the performances deserved. Actors who can't hear peals of laughter will look out for the next best thing, smiling and grinning. The sight of parted lips and white teeth heartens a comedy performer no end. But this too has gone. Another victory for masks over art. The bossiness of the Bridge Theatre was equalled by the regime at the Royal Docks Learning and Activity Centre. The venue required us to soap our hands with gin-scented muck on arrival and to occupy socially distanced benches. Masks were compulsory, even though the playing area was outdoors. The show, called 843, was a medley of speeches and sketches inspired by the BLM movement. As we waited for curtain up, a recorded voice howled extra rules in our ears. Stay seated during the performance. Do not move from your benches. First, a playlet featuring an American policewoman who sought permission to murder an innocent pedestrian. I'm armed and ready to engage, sir. The threat level is pretty severe. He's sitting there, sir, breathing, staring. Did this come from a genuine police transcript, or was it a piece of fiction? That uncertainty weakened its impact. Next, a dialogue about a black Yorkshireman who wanted his white father-in-law to understand oppression. When the father-in-law offered his point of view, the black guy retorted, "Suck my mum!" Instead of feeling apologetic, he was thrilled and elated by his sudden outburst. This interesting piece was too short and merited development. Third, a revolutionary speech from a BLM agitator. I was there, blood or bone, fist or bottle. The uprising is coming, ready or not. That's fine, but smashing things up is unlikely to lead us to a happier society. Finally, a monologue about an overlooked scandal. Black and ethnic minority people died disproportionately as a result of force by the British police, said the speaker. The phrase "as a result of force" was carefully chosen to cover a vast range of cases. A mentally ill man restrained and killed in a police station is very different from a career gangster shot dead by jumpy armed cops on the streets, but both were included in the catalogue of slaughter in order to substantiate the view that Britain's police forces are assassination squads. Lefty activists love to promote this falsehood. The speaker revealed that 1,740 ethnic minority citizens have died at the hands of the authorities in the last 50 years. She added that criminal proceedings have yet to be brought against any of those responsible. This back catalogue needs to be examined afresh, but the investigation will be strengthened by the removal of cases in which the police acted justly.
That was Lloyd Evans. Thanks for listening to this episode of Spectator Out Loud, and do join us again next week.